The category of vegetables as foodstuffs is so huge it's hard to get your head around. Trying to understand them, trying to narrow it down can be helpful. As an example, take a look at what I've got here. I've got some seeds that we eat, like corn, beans, and peas. There are pods that we eat, like green beans. Flowers that we eat, like cauliflower or an artichoke. There's roots that we eat, like beets and parsnips, carrots and turnips. There's bulbs that we eat, like all of the onions that you see here, the shallots, the garlic. There's tubers that we eat, not just potatoes, but sweet potatoes. And then finally, leaves that we eat, everything from spinach to parsley to cilantro. It's really kind of a broad category. And I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of vegetables, and it's exactly the variety that I was telling you about that I think is meaningful. Now, if you were to go to your favorite restaurants and do a walk around, you would find that every restaurant has the same steaks, the same salmon, the same shrimp. They have the same chicken on offer. You can get it with skin or without, with bones or without. But it really starts to blend together from one restaurant to the next. Enter vegetables, the glorious variety that's vegetables, and the variety that changes with every change of the season. This is really what keeps food interesting. Now, we're going to start to cook some vegetables. I'm going to turn on this burner, and I'm going to roast a vegetable over an open flame. I'm going to roast this eggplant, and while it's busy roasting, I'll get on with some other preparation. All right, eggplant aside, here's a head of cauliflower. We're going to roast this not over an open flame, but in the oven. And to begin with, I want to cut the core out of this head of cauliflower. Take it easy. It's easy for the knife to slip, so one step at a time. There we go. Whoops. That goes in the garbage. The leaves, likewise. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to break it apart into florets. I want to keep them on the large side because if they get too small, it looks a little bit like a train wreck when it's roasted. If you get some that are too big like this, I'm going to suggest you cut through the stem and then break them apart so that you don't have straight lines. You get something that looks a little more organic. So again, cut through the stem, break it apart. Cut through the stem only, break it apart. There's one last big one here. Cut through the stem and break it apart. I'm going to move all of this cauliflower into a bowl. Let me just clean up the bottom here. And we're going to season this first with olive oil, and then with salt, a little bit of pepper, not too much because there's more spice coming, and here I'm going to put curry powder and a little bit of cumin. We can toss this all together. A little bit too dry, so I'm going to add just a tad more olive oil. Already I can smell the wonderful aroma of that curry powder. Let's just give this a quick turn. And I'm going to take the cauliflower and put it onto a sheet pan or a cookie sheet. And we'll spread this out so that it roasts evenly. And I'm going to put it into the oven at 400 to 450 degrees for about 20 minutes. Now, you might want to check it after 10 and see how it's coming along. You will see a little bit of browning beginning to develop. I want to stir it again so that the oil that's on the pan coats the vegetables, and then put it back in, and it's imperative that this be tender. So it shouldn't be crunchy or hard. It should be tender. And the way I evaluate it is just to poke the stem with a knife, and the knife should go in easily, but the cauliflower should fall off the knife just as easily. So we're going to take this and we're going to put it into the oven. All right, with the cauliflower in the oven, here's what you can expect. Cauliflower that's roasting will get a concentrated flavor. Some of the sweetness that's in the vegetable will get even sweeter. And that sweetness side by side with the aromatic spices of curry is going to be delicious. I'm going to put this bowl aside, and then let's have a look at this eggplant. I'm going to bring it over here for just a second. As you can see, it's charred on the outside. If you could smell what I'm smelling, you'd smell a little smokiness. And what I'm looking for is for this to collapse completely. I want the flesh of this to be completely collapsed. Now, let me share with you something else. Right here, I have the eggplant that just came off this burner. Here's another eggplant that I roasted a little bit earlier, and as you can see, it has completely collapsed. If you're unwilling to roast over an open flame like this, and you don't like smoky flavors too much, you can also cut the eggplant in half, oil it, put it on a sheet pan, and throw it into the oven until it has roasted, browned, and again, completely collapsed. It's imperative that this not have any uncooked portions because they'll taste a little bit bitter. So I'm going to take the one that I roasted earlier. And what we want to do is we want to begin to peel this. And I usually take a knife and just very carefully push the charred skin away from the eggplant. Now, don't be too concerned if there's one or two pieces of the dark skin. This is a rustic dish called baba ganoush, and a little bit of charred skin in there actually enhances the nature of the dish. It makes it feel somehow more authentic because you know it's been roasted over an open flame. So, there's our eggplant. It should be tender enough that if I choose to, I can just mash it up with a fork and it will come right apart. And as you can see, it was perfectly roasted and it's ready to give up the ghost. Some of these juices that collected in the pan, these smoky juices, I'm going to grab hold of those as well. And just so that salt can begin to dissolve, I'm going to add some salt. I like to squeeze some lemon juice over this. As it sits, sometimes it can turn a little bit dark, and the lemon juice will help keep the color nice and bright. Lemon juice, not lemon seeds. Don't overdo it with the lemon juice. You don't want this to turn too sour, but I would say that's about a teaspoon of lemon juice per eggplant. All right, the next thing we're going to add is tahini. And tahini is the sesame version of peanut butter. It's sesame seeds that have been ground to a paste. And I'm going to pour that in. And we'll stir the tahini in. And very, very quickly, you may see that it starts to tighten up a little bit. In addition to tahini, I'm going to add some garlic. And remember the caution that when you add garlic, it's an easy thing to add more, but it's almost impossible to take it out. So go easy when you begin. And then finally, we're going to introduce and emulsify this sauce with some olive oil. Make it richer, give it more of a bright vegetal flavor. And so add the oil initially drop by drop, and just stir it in. And you want it to stay creamy. So if it starts to look oily, just slow down with the oil. And make sure that you mix it so that it can start to get creamy. At this point, a quick taste is in order. And I'm going to add even more lemon juice. And a little more olive oil. I'm looking for a very particular richness. Again, think of this almost like a salad. In fact, in the Middle East or even in the Eastern Mediterranean where this dish is from, they would call this a salad. They would say, you know, it makes its way onto the table as a part of a selection of vegetable dishes and other dishes at the beginning of the meal, and they would call this an eggplant salad. All right, a little more brightness with lemon juice. It has plenty of richness already from the tahini and from the olive oil. This has the most marvelous smoky flavor that comes from roasting over an open flame. It'll be a little bit milder if you roast the eggplant in the oven, but if you like that smokiness, you might do a little hybrid method where you roast it a little bit over the flame and then transfer it to the pan and put it in the oven before it starts to weep. Finally, I'm going to add just a little bit of water to thin this out. I think of this as a dip. You know, you can dip pita chips in here, you can dip vegetables in here. Sometimes I use it as a spread on sandwiches. All of those things will work. All right, now, and the traditional garnish is to spread it out and add a little bit of oil right on the top. I'm going to also add some parsley. And we'll set this aside for just a second. Now, the cauliflower that was in the oven, I have some here that's roasted already. And if you take a look, not only is the cauliflower tender, so it pierces easily, but the knife comes out as easily. This tastes every bit as good at room temperature as it does hot out of the oven. I actually like it as much, if not more, when it's at room temperature. I think that's the best way to taste it, as long as it's tender. It's really important that it be tender. Because there is so much flavor in this, I'm going to also squeeze a lime over it. And I sprinkled on some parsley. I think cilantro would be every bit as appropriate. There's our first two vegetable dishes done. We've got the roasted cauliflower with the concentrated flavor and the wonderful aroma of cumin, and here the aroma of smoky roasted eggplant with pita chip and the richness of olive oil. Eggplant salad, roasted vegetables at room temperature. Another way of understanding vegetables is by the pigment that gives them color. That's more helpful maybe to us here in the kitchen. As an example, imagine that you're cooking green beans. Now, green beans get their color from chlorophyll, and chlorophyll hates acidity. That's what turns green beans sort of olive drab. They also don't like long cooking. They like to cook quickly. So if you were cooking green beans right here and now, my recommendation would be a big pot of abundant boiling salted water so that no matter how many beans you put in, it doesn't stop boiling. That amount of water will water down any acidity that's inherent in the beans. You don't put a lid on it because a lid will just trap acidity in, and the acidity is volatile. It will pass off with the steam. And then finally, as soon as they're cooked, you take them out and you serve them quickly. Alternately, you take them and you shock them in ice water, stop the cooking, and reheat them later for service at another point. That's the way typically it's done in a restaurant. Imagine a beet for a second, however. Beets have a color that turns them red. It's a pigment called anthocyanins. And while chlorophyll hates acidity, anthocyanins absolutely love it. The red color of this beet will turn vivid and bright in the presence of acid. The problem that we have is that the pigment in this beet is water soluble. So if I peel the beet and I put it in that water, what ends up happening is all of the color washes away and your beets end up looking anemic and tired and sickly. So what we'll do is we'll take these beets and we'll leave the peel on, the root and the stalk on, and that way the color will stay inside until we're ready to peel it after it's been cooked. Now, I've also got some red beets here, or golden beets. Golden beets like acidity as well. It's not as pronounced as it is with red pigment, but golden beets will get just a little bit brighter. I'm going to take these and we're going to put them into this pot of water. I'm going to add salt to that water. And then finally, I'm going to put a big splash of cider vinegar in there. And those can cook very, very well until they're tender. What I'm looking for, ultimately, is a beet that when I pierce it with a knife, the knife goes in easily, but more importantly, the knife comes out easily. So if it clings on, if it holds on to the knife, they're not done. Once the beet is cooked, that's time enough to peel them. And what I suggest is getting a towel that you don't care much about and put the beet in there and then just rub the skin off. And you'll see how easily that skin comes off. You can also rub the root off, and you can rub off the top that has the stalks. This is going to stain the towel, but better that it stain the towel rather than my hands. And we are just about ready to go. If you get a little area that's persnickety and fights back, you can just use the knife to scrape that portion of the skin off. Also, right out of the hot pan, these will peel a little bit more easily. All right, so I'll take that and set it aside. Once you've got these beets cooked, people will oftentimes tell you, yeah, I'm not crazy about beets. And the problem typically is that the flavor is full and it tastes earthy in a way that people aren't so used to it. The answer to that is really simple. You just make sure that the flavor of the seasoning is as aggressive as the flavor of the beets. So we're going to make a little bit of a glaze. The glaze has got some orange juice in it. It's also got some lemon juice. Chicken stock, and then finally vinegar. Those are the liquid components, and I want you to also add some sugar to this. And it may seem like a lot, but it's that intensity of flavor that will make these beets taste good. Stir this all around. The sugar will dissolve almost immediately. And then bring it up to a boil. and cook it until most of the water has gone out of it. And you'll end up with a glaze that looks exactly like this. That took about 20 minutes to get to the point where it's thick and syrupy. And if you're curious, you can taste this. And it should have a really wonderful sweet sour flavor. This is pretty good. I'm going to add just a little bit more salt now. Remember, I didn't put any salt in earlier. And we've got the heat on high. What we're going to do is introduce the beets to this glaze. And also a little bit of butter. The nice thing about this glaze is it coats the beets in such a remarkable way that they get this wonderful glisten that I associate with glazed beets. I see that glistening beet and I can almost imagine exactly how it's going to taste. Here, let's go ahead and add these last few. Okay, while these beets are warming up in this wonderful glaze, let me just make a quick mention of these beet greens that are right here. If you buy beets that have the greens still attached, certainly they need to be cut off before you cook them, as we did here. But you might consider holding on to these and using them the same way you might use chard or escarole. You could use them in a pasta. You could add them to a pot of minestrone. There's a lot of nutrition and a lot of flavor in those beet greens. So I'm going to set them aside. That's how you cook red vegetables, or one way to cook red vegetables, but certainly there's very few ways of cooking beets that are nearly that good. Okay, we've done a lot of cooking of vegetables already. We roasted it over an open flame. We roasted it in the oven with cauliflower. We boiled beets and glazed them. We talked about green vegetables. Now I'd like to share with you a recipe for carrots. And as vegetables go, these are maybe the most forgiving of all. The pigment that gives carrots their color doesn't care a fig whether it's acidic or not, whether you cook them long or short. They are just happy to be around, being helpful. So what we're going to do is make a carrot osso buco. Osso buco is a dish that's usually reserved for veal shanks. The name means bone with a hole in it. We're going to take something that's not veal shanks, but that is just as tough, and that is these big old carrots. And we're going to cook them long and slow as though we were braising a veal shank. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is cut the ends off of these carrots and set that aside. You can peel these carrots, or if they look pretty good, you can just scrub them clean. Either way, and I want to cut them into big pieces. I'm going to take the big pieces, and if it's really big, maybe I'll cut them into quarters. Otherwise, I'll just cut them in half. And from the smaller end, I'll leave them whole. I'm going to take these carrots and I'm going to brown them in olive oil and butter. And you can see here, you can see here that I've got some that are browned already. And we're going to carry on. So browning gives us a lot of flavor. We're going to carry on. I'm going to put a little fresh oil in here. And I want to build a braise. We've braised meats already. I'm going to build it with onions that can go in. And I want to cook the onions until they're translucent. Now, when you brown the carrots, a little bit of browning is all you need. They don't need to be black. We want sort of a sweet caramelization on there. That's the sugar in those carrots beginning to brown. While this is cooking, let me walk you through some of the rest of the ingredients. Obviously, we have carrots. I've got onions, celery, and tomatoes that are going in, and the tomatoes will turn themselves into a sauce. If they're a little bit dry, you can add some stock. I have some chicken stock. Vegetable stock would be appropriate if you want this to be a vegetarian dish. I'm going to take and add a little bouquet garni. And if you'll recall, bay leaf, thyme, parsley, and I'm going to add a couple of slices of orange, which I think does really nice things with the flavors of carrots. Just to concentrate and thicken the flavor of tomatoes. I've got some tomato paste here, and then some parsley, garlic, and lemon zest. And I'm going to show you a great little technique later on that will use those ingredients. All right. So the onions are translucent. In goes the celery. We'll stir that in as well. And here is a clove of garlic, and I'm just going to smash it down and add it. In a long simmered dish like this carrot ossobuco, that one little flattened clove of garlic will cook into a velvety puree by the time an hour has come and gone. A little bit of tomato paste. And I want to stir and cook that, albeit very briefly, just to take the bright color out of that tomato paste and give it a little depth of flavor. In goes the bouquet garni. In goes the slices of orange with the zest intact. That'll give us a nice aromatic bitterness that will taste of oranges. All of the peeled, seeded, and diced tomatoes. Depending on the time of the year, those may be canned tomatoes or they may be fresh tomatoes that you yourself turn into tomato concasse. Now, some stock. Season the dish with salt and pepper. Spread things out evenly. And then for this to be a true braise, we need a tight-fitting lid that will keep the moisture in. Just the same way as if we were braising a piece of meat, the sauce comes about half to two-thirds of the way up the side. Maybe about halfway up as I'm seeing it right here. And that's just right. Tight-fitting lid. I'll turn the temperature down. I've got a burner over here on low. And we'll let that simmer for about an hour. Check it periodically. Every 10, 15 minutes, just go in there, give it a stir, turn the pieces of the carrot over. What you want is to make sure they cook evenly. And you certainly don't want this pan to go dry. So if it's cooking faster and you need to add a little splash of water, you can. Now, take a look at what I've got here. Earlier, about an hour ago, I started to cook this dish. And at this point, I can take out both the bouquet garni and the slices of orange and set those aside. They've done their job already. If you notice, the sauce is nice and thick, but still liquid. The onions are tender. The tomatoes have begun to fall apart, and I want to taste this. And it's actually got a great flavor. For me, it's still a little bit sweet. And so I'm going to give it a few drops of lemon juice. You know, that made all the difference, that little squeeze of lemon. So, to serve this, I've got a plate. This could be a vegetarian entree all on its own. More likely, I would serve this side by side with a piece of chicken or a steak as a vegetable in its own right. And the beauty of this is that it can be cooked well in advance. I can cook it yesterday or even the day before and then just reheat it very gently on top of the stove with a little splash of extra water. When you're making a dish that's braised, whether it's meat or vegetables, what you gain is a tremendous complexity and depth of flavor. What you lose is vitality and freshness, because it's cooked for so long that vitality sort of passes off into the ether. So what we're going to do is find a way to put that vitality back into this dish. And I'm going to do it with something known as gremolata. Gremolata is three things. It's parsley that's chopped, it is lemon zest, and it's garlic. And if you take the garlic and crush it, and you take the lemon zest and stack it up and begin the process of dicing it very, very fine, slicing it up very, very fine. And then you mix all three of them together, you will end up with a mixture that is pure aroma and fresh, vital flavor. It's got the grassy sweetness of the parsley, the sharp, aromatic, citrusy quality of the lemon zest, and then the bite of the garlic. All right, I'm going to gather them all up together, and we'll chop them together. The flavors of the gremolata should be distinct, but I don't think you should get big chunks of raw garlic. Neither do I think you should get big pieces of lemon zest. I think it should all be cut up very, very fine, so even the heat of this dish is enough to sort of wake these flavors up and bring them to life. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to move this over. Now a little bit of the gremolata over the top. And right away, you get the wonderful smell of those vital aromatic vegetables sort of wafting off this dish. That's it. Now that we've eaten our vegetables, we've earned dessert. When we come back for the next lesson, we're going to get mixed up in making a few great desserts.